When Clint Eastwood sat in Mia's section, she had no idea her life was about to change forever. Mia adjusted her apron, glancing at the clock above the diner's counter. It was nearing 7 p.m., the time when the dinner rush usually slowed, giving her a chance to catch her breath. The small diner, tucked off a highway, was just a pit stop for most travelers, a place to grab a quick meal before hitting the road again. But for Mia, this diner was everything, her lifeline. At 28, she juggled long shifts with raising her 6-year-old son, Jordan. Every tip and paycheck went toward keeping a roof over their heads, buying school supplies, and ensuring Jordan had what he needed. She moved gracefully from table to table, her warm smile hiding the exhaustion that clawed at her every day. The regulars knew parts of her story. Some would slip her an extra dollar when they could, but Mia never asked for sympathy. Life wasn't fair. She had learned that long ago. Her only choice was to keep going, one day at a time. The bell above the door chimed, drawing Mia's attention. She turned, expecting another weary traveler. Instead, a man entered with a quiet confidence that seemed to make the air in the diner feel heavier. He wore a simple button-up shirt and jeans, his weathered face partially hidden under a low-brimmed hat. For a moment, Mia didn't recognize him. But when he looked her way, it hit her. Clint Eastwood. The Clint Eastwood. Her breath caught. Mia wasn't one to fawn over celebrities. She didn't have the time or energy. But Clint Eastwood was different. He was an icon, a legend her late father used to talk about as they watched old westerns together. The memories flickered in her mind, but she quickly pushed them aside. He was just a customer, she reminded herself, and she had a job to do. Clint chose a corner booth, settling in quietly. Mia grabbed her notepad and pen, took a steadying breath, and approached. As she got closer, she noticed the small details. His hands, strong but weathered. His piercing eyes, sharp and observant under the brim of his hat. He looked up as she stopped beside him, his expression calm yet unreadable. "Good evening," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "What can I get started for you?" He glanced briefly at the menu before setting it aside. "Just a coffee and a burger. Medium rare, no onions." Mia jotted it down, ignoring the slight tremor in her hand. As she turned to leave, Clint's voice stopped her. "Busy night?" She turned back, surprised. Most customers didn't make small talk unless they were regulars. "Not too bad," she replied with a faint smile. "Keeps me on my toes." He nodded, his expression softening slightly. "You've got a good pace. Not easy to keep up in a place like this." Was Clint Eastwood complimenting her? She blinked, unsure how to respond, but managed a polite smile before retreating to the counter. Her mind raced as she put in his order. Why was he here in this little diner off the highway? A man of his status could eat anywhere, yet here he was, sipping water from a chipped glass like any other traveler. When the order was ready, Mia carried the plate and coffee to his table. She set them down carefully, catching a brief appreciative glance from him. "Thank you," he said simply. "You're welcome," she replied, trying to sound casual. But she couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was different, significant even. Clint ate slowly, methodically, as if he had all the time in the world. Occasionally their eyes met, and he'd offer her a polite nod. Each time her stomach fluttered. When he finished his meal, he gestured to her with a slight raise of his hand. Mia wiped her hands on her apron and approached. "Everything all right?" she asked. "Perfect," he said with a small smile. "That was one of the best burgers I've had in a long time." She chuckled lightly, caught off guard by the compliment. "I'll let the cook know. He'll appreciate hearing that." For a moment, Clint didn't respond. He simply looked at her, his gaze steady but kind. "You've got a good energy about you," he said finally. "You remind me of someone I knew a long time ago." Mia blinked, unsure how to respond. "Well, thank you," she said softly, her cheeks warming. "I just try to get through the day like everyone else." He nodded, his eyes glinting with something she couldn't quite place. "That's the trick, isn't it? Just getting through." Before she could reply, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a few bills, placing them on the table along with a folded piece of paper. "Keep the change," he said, standing up, "and read this when you get a moment." Mia stared at the note, her heart pounding. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but he was already walking toward the door. The bell above it jingled as he left, and just like that, he was gone. For a moment, Mia stood frozen by the booth, staring at the folded note as if it might burn her fingers. What could he have possibly written? And why had he seemed so intent on her reading it? But the questions would have to wait. There were still tables to serve. Later, after her shift ended and the diner emptied, Mia finally allowed herself to sit down in the back room. With trembling hands, she unfolded the note. Her eyes scanned the first few lines, and her breath hitched. Dear Mia, I don't know much about you, but in the short time I've been here, I've seen something rare. True resilience. Watching how you manage this place with grace, even under pressure, is a reminder of how much strength exists in everyday heroes. You remind me of someone very dear to me, someone who taught me the value of hard work and kindness. I don't know your story, but I can see in your eyes that you've carried more than your share of burdens. That's why I want to do something. No strings attached. Mia's hands shook as she continued reading. I'm leaving a small gesture for you to use however you see fit, whether it's for your child, your future, or simply a moment of rest. I hope it brings you some peace. People like you deserve to be seen, and I see you. Folded inside the note was a check. When Mia saw the amount, her knees buckled. $10,000. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched the check. It wasn't just the money, though. That alone was life-changing. It was the words, the acknowledgement, the feeling that someone had truly noticed her. In that moment, Mia's world shifted, and as she looked at the note again, she knew one thing for certain. She would find a way to pay this kindness forward.